But right now, today, this is her DOJ. It is up to her to prosecute if there's prosecutable crimes. It is up to her to release all the files and comply with the law that was passed. It is up to her to give justice and closure to those survivors.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button because we're about to break down something wild. So Pam Bondi just had her moment on Capitol Hill, and it did not go the way she probably hoped. She's up there testifying about the Epstein files. Survivors are literally sitting behind her waiting for answers, and instead of addressing them, she's yelling at Congress members and calling people names. Ana Navarro, who actually knows Bondi personally from Florida, is not holding back her reaction to this performance, and the panel reveals some pretty shocking facts about what Bondi's DOJ has and hasn't done for the people who came forward to help. You're going to want to stick around for this entire breakdown because the way this unfolds shows a pattern you can't unsee. And real quick, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in, so don't be shy. All right, let's get into it.
I'm not going to get in the gutter for her theatrics. Who he was?
Mr. Chairman, she's embarrassing you.
He's about to be
This is your committee, and she is embarrassing
Shame
you.
on you. Have you apologized to President Trump? You all should be apologizing. You sit here and you attack the president, and I am not going to have it.
It almost seems like something out of a reunion episode of a Bravo show or something. But it's interesting because Pam Bondi actually, to be honest, has not really been around all that much. When we've been talking about the Epstein files, the person they've been putting out is Todd Blanche, and now she's there on Capitol Hill and seems to be putting on a show of defiance. But I think the real question is over what? Over the finding out the truth about a child sex ring? It just seems like the wrong attitude for this issue.
Listen, I'm an institutionalist. I want there to be some iota of respect for the institution of Congress. I think this kind of performative theatrics, she says she's not going to get in the gutter for her theatrics, for somebody else's theatrics. Everything she did today was performative. And I say this as somebody who has known Pam Bondi for many years. I knew her back in Florida when she was Attorney General. I don't think this served anybody. I don't think these shouting matches, and let's just be, honest about it. When Democrats were in power in Congress, the shouting matches still went on. When Republicans are in power, the shouting matches still go. These congressional hearings have really degraded into
anything quite like this. I mean, regardless of political party. I mean, even Trump's other attorney generals, Bill Barr, Jeff Sessions. I don't know.
The part that really bothered me today, and I give MAGA a lot of credit. The one thing I give them credit for is not letting go of the Epstein files bone. They just never did. And there was people like Nancy Mace, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who defied Donald Trump and voted to release these files, and the MAGA blogosphere and podcast universe who never let it go. That being said, I thought today, Pam Bondi, having those victims, those survivors there, and the family of the survivors that have died, and not having the common courtesy of, at the very least, turning around and acknowledging their presence. And I do think those survivors are owed an apology by 4 administrations. Right. And she is right that Merrick Garland should have answered questions. But right now, today, this is her DOJ. It is up to her to prosecute if there's prosecutable crimes. It is up to her to release all the files and comply with the law that was passed. It is up to her to give justice and closure to those survivors. It was so shameful to me that those survivors got told and asked, raise your hand if you have called the DOJ and offered to testify. They all raised their hands, and none had been contacted by this DOJ, which is run by Pam Bondi, a woman from Florida who knows who Epstein is. That is damn disgusting and shameful.
Yeah, I mean, I pick up on that because I think the conversation today, I've been watching all the news, has been about the theatrics that were happening on Capitol Hill. But the reality is the real conversation we should be talking about is the survivors. The conversation of how brave it is for them to even have been there. 1 in 5 women in America have experienced some sort of sexual assault. The reality is this gives us the complete picture of what this administration is. They will do whatever to protect their sexual assaulter in chief, who was found liable for sexual assault before. The reality reality is we're not having this conversation that protects women. It continues to perpetuate this situation and this culture in America where it makes women hard to come forward and actually say, this person did something extremely wrong to me. And that's the conversation we should be having. But I'm not surprised that this administration is deflecting from it, because let's look at the first Trump administration when the hearings around Kavanaugh, and Professor Ford actually was brave enough to share her story.
Even if we put the Trump of it aside for a second, there were still some really bizarre moments today. I mean,
The moment Pam Bondi stood up there saying she's not hitting the gutter for theatrics, she became the theatrics. That's the irony that Ana Navarro catches immediately. Because when you watch Bondi screaming, you sit here and you attack the president, and I am not going to have it. You're not watching someone defend justice. You're watching a performance audition. Ana even says everything she did today was performative, and she's known Bondi personally for years back in Florida. That's not some random critic. That's someone who's watched this transformation happen. But here's where it gets absolutely devastating. The Epstein survivors were sitting right there in that hearing room. These are people who've been through unimaginable trauma, who came forward willing to help with the investigation. Yeah, and Ana reveals something that should make everyone's blood boil. When they asked how many survivors had called the DOJ offering to testify, they all raised their hands. Every single one. And how many had been contacted by Bondi's Department of Justice? 0. Not one. Ana calls it damn disgusting and shameful, and she's absolutely right. Think about what that means. While Bondi is putting on this theatrical display about being tough on crime and demanding accountability, she hasn't done the basic work of actually calling back the victims who want to help. That tells you everything about where the priorities really are. This isn't about justice for survivors. This is about creating sound bites and defending powerful people. The panel member who brings up how 1 in 5 women experience assault in America connects the dots perfectly. When you have an administration leader who was found liable for assault himself, of course the culture reflects that. Of course survivors get ignored while the theatrics get amplified.
this is an interaction between Pam Bondi and Tom Massey, and he's asking her why the DOJ hasn't or didn't prosecute some people who are named in the Epstein files as being co-conspirators. And here's how she responded.
Are you able to track who it was that obscured Les Wexner's name as a co-conspirator in an FBI document?
Chairman, may I
have
give my
another
answer
question.
on that?
Here's
It's a political
the question.
joke, and I need to give my answer on that.
We'll let the Attorney General respond, and then the gentleman can move to his next
Chairman,
question.
it's my time.
Within 40 minutes, you asked me a question.
You can give
Within
me-
40 minutes, Wexner's name was added back.
Within 40 minutes
You
of me catching you red-handed.
There was one redaction out
Where
of
he's
over
listed as a
4,700,
co-conspirator.
and we invited
what?
you
Show
in.
the video.
This guy has Trump derangement syndrome. He needs to get, you're a failed politician.
Again, I just don't know who that serves, Scott. I mean, literally on that document, the name that is blacked out says co-conspirator. That should be an obvious non-redaction. And to not even acknowledge, I think that's a pretty big mistake. To not even acknowledge that, I think, and then make it about Thomas Massey and his relationship with Trump or whatever, seems to obscure the bigger issue, which is that there are potential perpetrators, alleged perpetrators, who are still being protected.
Well, look, I don't know how the redactions are made or not made. And look, obviously it was brought up and then they unredacted it, and it's 3.5 million documents. And I have always wondered how in the world you ever get it perfect. And I've also wondered, the danger of accidentally or whatever, putting people's names out there who were victims, who shouldn't have their names out there. Anytime you're dumping this many documents, it's been worrisome. All of that having been said, this hearing today to me, look, I get the desire to fight because, look, and I agree with Anna, actually. These hearings are basically people show up, they make speeches, then they give the witness 10 seconds to respond, and then they yell at the witness. It's been going on for a long time. It makes these hearings useless. That having been said, at the DOJ, I think if I were advising them, I would advise them to do it more like Scott Bessent handles his hearings. It's not a lot of performative. It's not a lot of theatrics. He remains cool. He is in command of the facts, and that's how he chooses to do it. They come after him the same way, but he has a different style of how he carries himself and how he presents himself. I think that, truthfully, better serves the administration because it shows more confidence in what you're doing as opposed to just the fighting and the back and forth.
She must be doing it because she thinks somebody
Right.
likes it.
Exactly. I mean, Besson has the benefit of the kind of a financial view, which can be argued in multiple ways, and you can have facts.
Watch what happens when Congressman Tom Massey asks Bondi a direct question about why certain names were redacted as co-conspirators in the Epstein documents. This is a Republican asking her, not some partisan attack. He's asking why someone listed as a co-conspirator had their name blacked out, when that should obviously be public information. And Bondi's response? She says this guy has derangement syndrome and calls him a failed politician. That's not an answer. That's a meltdown. When you can't answer a factual question about document redactions, so you resort to personal attacks against the person asking, you've already lost the argument. The panel breaks this down perfectly. On that document, a name that says co-conspirator next to it is blacked out. That's not a judgment call about protecting victims. That's protecting an alleged perpetrator. And instead of acknowledging that obvious problem, Bondi makes it about Massey's relationship with the former president. She's deflecting from potential perpetrators who are still being shielded. Here's what strikes me about this whole strategy. The conservative commentator on the panel actually provides a blueprint for how this should have been handled. Stay cool, command the facts, don't make it theatrical. That's how you show confidence in what you're doing. But Bondi can't do that because the facts are just not on their side in these particular hearings. When you don't have the truth backing you up, all you have left is volume and attacks. That's the stall and brawl strategy the New York Times identified. You can't win on substance, so you try to win on aggression and hope people get too tired to keep asking questions.
The facts are just not on their side in these particular hearings. You know, we just saw Patel, now we've seen Bondi. The New York Times called this a stall and brawl strategy. I think that is a perfect description of what it is, because we see people constantly contorting themselves to try to defend the indefensible. They deflect instead of answering questions directly. They try to substitute passion for truth. They try to talk fast rather than straight talk. And that is all for one person only, because it is a person who likes it, and that is Donald Trump. And so all of this genuflecting, I feel like every one of these people should have bloody knees because they are genuflecting to this man all the time.
But you know, if nothing else, she should have turned around to those survivors and said, my DOJ, we should have contacted you. I'm sorry we didn't. My DOJ will be on it, and we will be contacting you and getting your stories. That's just unacceptable.
Let me show you this image. This is Pam Bondi's notes. It was captured by a photographer, and it shows that they had taken over at the DOJ notes of what members, in this case it was Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, what they searched when they went into the DOJ to look at the Epstein files. And I don't know, what does that tell you, Chris, about what the priorities were going into this hearing on the Bondi side of things?
I just totally agree with Anna. I think that we've absolutely lost what this is about. This should not be political. This really shouldn't. These women were victims of sexual assault, and we are continually just brushing over that for theater. And a number of their names were released here. They were victimized again. And I've seen this in my job a number of times. And we keep forgetting this over and over again. But then when the Attorney General gets up there and just wants to combat and just wants to yell, it seemed a lot more to me like an interview for the White House than it did, rather than trying to actually address the underlying problem. I mean, when you have a Republican like Massey saying, hey, listen, why aren't you going after these people? Why are you redacting names that say conspirator? And then you have Democrats on the other hand saying this. You have lots of Democrats in these files. You have lots of Republicans in these files. But we're forgetting all these women that are sitting right behind you. And I totally agree with Anna. I don't understand why you can't start a hearing and just simply say, I'm sorry. I am sorry about not only what you have gone through, but I'm also sorry that my department released your names publicly.
Well,
that is not a big ask.
Well, Pam Bondi has clearly shown us that she has no soul and does not literally care about people's experiences, and that's why we couldn't get it, and I wouldn't have expected it from her.
It was also absolutely ridiculous. First, she was being very inconsistent with what Todd Blanche has said about some of these in some of these answers, but it was ridiculous for her.
The mask hasn't just slipped, it's been ripped off. What we witnessed on Capitol Hill wasn't a quest for justice. It was a high-stakes audition for a cult of personality. Pam Bondi, the supposed gatekeeper of American law, walked into a room full of Epstein survivors and chose to play the role of a theatrical bouncer for the MAGA elite. While victims sat behind her, literally begging for closure, Bondi was too busy screaming at Congress to bother acknowledging their existence. This is the stall and brawl strategy in its purest, most toxic form. When the facts are damning and the corruption is deep, the right wing resorts to volume and vitriol. They don't want to talk about the files. Wake-up derangement syndrome is a calculated design designed to protect the powerful, while the working class and the vulnerable are left to rot in the shadows of a broken legal system. The most blood-boiling revelation isn't just Bondi shouting matches, it's the silence. Every single survivor in that room raised their hand to say they had contacted the DOJ to testify. And how many did Bondi's department call back? 0, not 1. While she's on TV pretending to be tough on crime, she is actively ghosting the very people who have the evidence to bring the corporate and political elite to their knees. Let's be clear about the redactions. When a document lists someone as a co-conspirator and the DOJ blacks out that name, they aren't protecting victims, they are shielding monsters. When confronted with this by a member of her own party, Bondi didn't offer a legal justification. She launched a personal attack. This is the blueprint for the new GOP. If you can't defend the indefensible, burn the institution down and call the truth a political joke. The common good has been traded for common loyalty to one man. As one panelist noted, these officials have bloody knees from genuflecting to the MAGA altar. They have traded their souls for a seat at the table of the billionaire class. Whether it's the Ghislaine Maxwell prison camp transfer or the blatant ignoring of survivors, the message is loud and clear. Under this administration, the elite get protection and the victims get the gutter. We cannot afford to be tired. We cannot afford to look away. This isn't just about one hearing. It's about a culture of impunity that treats survivors as props and the law as a weapon for the wealthy. The stall and brawl only works if we stop asking questions. They want us to get exhausted by their theatrics so we don't notice the names they're hiding in the black ink of those redactions. It is time to mobilize. We are the digital militia for the truth, and we are the only thing standing between these survivors and total erasure. Share this video, flood the comments, and demand that the Epstein files be released in full, no redactions, no excuses, no more protection for the predator class. The common good demands justice, not a Bravo-style reunion performance. Stand up, speak out, and refuse to be silenced.